The birth of Jesus is familiar, but what happened just after is a story of mystery, danger, and faith. Unexpected visitors from the east, guided by a star, set off a chain of events that would change history. In Matthew chapter 2, we move from Bethlehem to Jerusalem and then to Egypt as a powerful king feels threatened by a newborn. This is not just a tale of a baby, but a drama of earthly power versus heavenly purpose. The journey of the wise men, the warnings in dreams, and the escape to Egypt all reveal a larger plan, one that fulfills ancient promises. This story sets the stage for Jesus' life, a conflict between God's kingdom and the kingdoms of this world. In this chapter, we meet the wise men, scholars from the east drawn by a star and a prophecy. They bring gifts for a king, seeking to worship the newborn. King Herod, known for his power and paranoia, sees the child as a threat. Joseph, a humble carpenter, and Mary, a courageous young mother, must protect their child, Jesus. These characters, seekers, rulers, and the faithful, are united by the birth of one child. Through them, we see God's plan. Jesus is for all people, but not all will welcome him. Their story is about seeking truth, facing fear, and trusting God's guidance. Far in the east, wise men saw a new star, a sign of a royal birth. Compelled by faith, they left everything behind to follow this sign, crossing deserts and mountains. The star was their guide and hope, leading them on a spiritual quest. After a long journey, they arrived in Judea, expecting to find the king in Jerusalem. They entered the city and asked, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." Their question unsettled the city and reached the ears of a troubled king. These seekers were about to change the course of the story. Their journey was not just about finding a child, but about discovering the truth. Herod, disturbed by the wise men's news, saw a threat to his throne. He called the chief priests and scribes, demanding to know where the Messiah would be born. The answer: Bethlehem, as foretold by the prophets. Herod secretly met the wise men, pretending to share their interest, and asked when the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Find the child and tell me, so I may worship him too." But Herod's words were a lie. He planned to destroy the child. The wise men, unaware, continued their journey, walking into a king's trap. Leaving Jerusalem, the wise men saw the star reappear, guiding them to Bethlehem. Their joy was overwhelming. Their journey was nearly complete. The star led them to a humble house, not a palace. Inside they found the child with Mary, his mother. All their hardships faded as they saw the fulfillment of prophecy. They fell down and worshipped him, offering their gifts. In that simple setting, they recognized the true king. Their faith had led them to the hope of the world. The wise men bowed in worship and offered treasures: gold for a king, frankincense for God, and myrrh for a sacrifice. Each gift was precious and deeply symbolic: gold for royalty, frankincense for divinity, and myrrh foretelling sacrifice. Their act of worship stands as a timeless example of seeking God and offering him the very best. Their journey was complete. The wise men had completed their sacred mission. They followed the star, found the newborn king, and offered their gifts. As they slept, God warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. Upon waking, they understood the gravity of the warning. They departed into their own country another way, avoiding Herod. Back in his grand palace in Jerusalem, King Herod waited. The days turned into a week, and then perhaps longer. He expected the wise men to return at any moment, bringing him the precise location of his newborn rival. But the wise men never came. The roads from Bethlehem remained empty of their caravan. The silence from the east was deafening. Slowly, the terrible truth dawned on Herod. He had been tricked. These foreign scholars, these stargazers he had tried to manipulate, had outsmarted him. They had found the child and then deliberately disobeyed his command, vanishing without a trace. The Bible tells us that when Herod realized he had been mocked of the wise men, he was exceeding wroth. This was not simple annoyance or frustration, it was a volcanic eruption of fury. Herod, a man whose pride was as great as his power, had been made a fool of. His authority had been challenged, and his paranoid fears about a rival king now seemed more real than ever. In his mind, this was not just an act of defiance by a few travelers, it was part of a larger conspiracy to dethrone him. His entire kingdom, his very life, felt threatened by a child he had never even seen. This rage was not the kind that could be calmed or reasoned with. It was the rage of a tyrant who saw threats in every shadow. All the cruelty and ruthlessness for which Herod was known now came boiling to the surface. His carefully laid plan to discreetly eliminate a single child had failed. Now, blinded by his anger and fear, he would resort to a far more brutal and horrifying solution. He would not allow this prophesied king of the Jews to live. If he could not find the one specific child, he would create a net of death so wide that his target could not possibly escape. The information he had so carefully gathered from the wise men now became the blueprint for his terrible new plan. He remembered asking them exactly when the star had first appeared. From their answer, he had calculated the child's approximate age. He determined that the baby could be no more than 2 years old. This calculation sealed the fate of dozens of innocent children. Herod's mind was now set on a course of unimaginable violence. His personal fear and political paranoia were about to be unleashed upon the unsuspecting families of a small, peaceful town. Herod's fury became a weapon, aimed at Bethlehem. He ordered soldiers to kill every male child under 2, hoping to destroy the new king. Terror swept the town as soldiers tore infants from their mothers' arms. The grief of Bethlehem's mothers echoed ancient prophecy, Rachel weeping for her children. Yet, the Holy Family had already escaped. Herod's rage struck at nothing. The true king was safe. Just as God warned the wise men to avoid Herod, he now moved to protect the Holy Family from the king's wrath. As Joseph slept, an angel appeared in a dream with an urgent command. "Arise, take the child and his mother, and flee into Egypt." Joseph obeyed immediately, gathering his family and leaving by night. His faith and swift action placed them on the road to safety, just before Herod's plan unfolded. The journey to Egypt was not a short or easy trip. It would have been a long and dangerous path, covering hundreds of miles. For Joseph, Mary, and the infant Jesus, traveling by night and likely on foot or with a single donkey, the trek would have been incredibly challenging. They had to cross the harsh and barren Sinai desert, a place of extreme temperatures, scarce water, and the constant threat of bandits. This was no leisurely trip, it was a desperate flight for their lives. Every step took them further from their home, but closer to safety, away from the reach of King Herod's soldiers who would soon be searching for them. The family was now living the life of refugees. They were leaving their homeland, their culture, and their language behind to seek asylum in a foreign country. Egypt had a long and complex history with the people of Israel. It was the land where their ancestors had been enslaved for centuries before being led out by Moses. Yet, in this moment of crisis, this ancient land of bondage became their place of refuge and salvation. It was a safe haven because it was part of the Roman Empire but outside of Herod's direct control. There, the king of Judea had no power, and his murderous orders could not be carried out. Think of the immense trust Mary and Joseph had in God during this journey. They were traveling into the unknown, with very few resources, responsible for the life of this special child. They had to rely completely on God's provision and protection for every need, for food, for water, for shelter, and for safety from the many dangers of the desert. Their faith was not just a belief they held in their hearts. It was an active trust they lived out with every weary step they took. This journey forged them, strengthening their reliance on God and deepening their understanding of the extraordinary mission they were a part of. This flight into Egypt is a powerful symbol of Jesus' own life and ministry. From his very first days on earth, he was an outcast, a wanderer, and a target of those in power. He shared the experience of being a refugee, of being homeless and vulnerable, which connects him to the suffering and displacement that so many people face throughout history. His family's desperate journey shows that God's plan is often carried out not in comfort and security, but through hardship, uncertainty, and trial. The King of all creation began his life on the run, a powerful reminder of the humility and sacrifice that would mark his entire time on earth. The Holy Family's escape to Egypt was not just a practical move to save Jesus from Herod's rage. As with so many events in the story of Jesus' birth, this one also had a deeper, prophetic meaning. Matthew, writing his gospel primarily for a Jewish audience, is always careful to show how Jesus' life fulfills the ancient scriptures of Israel. He explains that this journey into a foreign land was the fulfillment of a prophecy. After describing their arrival in Egypt, Matthew quotes the prophet Hosea saying that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet saying, "Out of Egypt have I called my son." In its original context, the verse from Hosea was talking about the nation of Israel. God called Israel his son, and he led them out of slavery in Egypt during the Great Exodus. It was a foundational event in the history of the Jewish people, a story of God's power to save and redeem his chosen ones. Now Matthew sees a new and deeper fulfillment of these words in the life of Jesus. He shows that Jesus is the true Son of God, and just as Israel was called out of Egypt, Jesus the Son would also be called out of Egypt. He relives the history of his people in his own life. This fulfillment of prophecy is incredibly important. It shows that God's plan of salvation was not a series of random events, but a carefully woven story, planned and foretold centuries in advance. The flight to Egypt was not a sign that God's plan had gone wrong or been derailed by Herod's evil. On the contrary, it was proof that God was in complete control, using even the wicked intentions of a tyrant to accomplish his own sovereign purposes. Every step of Jesus' life, even the steps he took as a refugee infant, was in perfect harmony with the scriptures, proving his identity as the long-awaited Messiah. So the family remained in Egypt, living as foreigners in a strange land, waiting for God's next command. They stayed there until the danger had passed, until the one who sought the child's life was no more. The time they spent in Egypt is a quiet chapter in Jesus' life, with few details given. But it was a necessary and significant period of protection. It allowed the evil of Herod to burn itself out, ensuring that the child would be safe to one day return to his own land. The escape to Egypt was a dramatic chapter of danger and deliverance, a testament to Joseph's obedience, and a powerful confirmation of God's unfolding plan. The Holy Family lived as exiles in Egypt, waiting for God's signal. Joseph worked as a carpenter, while Mary cared for Jesus. Meanwhile, King Herod's reign of terror ended in pain and death. The tyrant who caused so much suffering was gone, and his power slipped away. With Herod's death, the threat was removed. God's plan moved forward, and the Holy Family could finally return home. Once again, God spoke to Joseph in a dream. The angel told him, "Arise, take the child and his mother and go to Israel. Those who sought the child's life are dead." Joseph's heart filled with relief and joy. The time of exile was over. He gathered his family and began the journey home, trusting God's promise. Their return was more than a journey. It was a sign. The king was coming home. As Joseph led his family back into the land of Israel, he intended to return to Bethlehem. But troubling news came. Archelaus ruled Judea, as cruel as his father. Joseph was afraid to go there, needing divine guidance. God spoke to Joseph in a dream, directing him away from danger. They traveled to Galilee, a safer, remote region. God led them to Nazareth, where Jesus would grow up. Joseph led his family back to Nazareth, a humble town in Galilee, overlooked by many. Here, Jesus grew up, learning carpentry, playing in dusty streets and studying scripture. Not in Jerusalem or Bethlehem, but in Nazareth, God's Son spent his hidden years fulfilling prophecy. He would forever be known as Jesus of Nazareth, a title from a humble place chosen by God. Matthew chapter 2 reveals a story of danger, faith, and divine intervention. The wise men, guided by a star, journeyed to honor the infant king with gifts. In contrast, King Herod's fear led to a dark attempt to thwart God's plan. Yet divine guidance ensured the Holy Family's escape to Egypt. After Herod's death, they returned to Nazareth, fulfilling prophecy. God's sovereign plan unfolds, unstoppable by any earthly power. Matthew chapter 2 is more than history. It's a timeless message for us today. The wise men sought Jesus with passion, offering their best treasures in worship. Joseph obeyed God's call, even when it meant stepping into the unknown. God protected Jesus, showing us we're never alone in our challenges. Ultimately, Matthew 2 offers hope. God's light shines brightest in the darkness.